I'm going to record this morning's session because we also get a lot of people who have things come up last minute and then ask for the recording afterwards. So we just give them access to that. And I'll also send this through to you as well, so that you can, if there's anything in today that you want to go back over, you've got the option to do that. And if you want to share it with anyone in your network, then you've got the opportunity to do that too. So do feel free. So this morning's session, we're going to three parts. The first part, I'll just share some principles. We're going to look at how do we start to introduce coaching to our teams, and what does world-class coaching look like? And I'll share some principles around that. And then the second part of our session today, I'm going to invite you into some breakout discussions with each other. So you'll get to, hopefully you get to meet someone new today, have a conversation, broaden your network, get to share and learn from each other's experiences, because a big part of learning is from other people and what they've experienced before. And then the third part of the session is we'll just ask I don't know how many groups we'll have by the time we get going, 2 or 3 groups. We'll just ask each of the groups just to feed back what their key themes and changes were, because there's learning in that as well. So we'll learn some principles, we'll have an opportunity for discussion, learn from the discussion in your breakout groups, and then we'll also learn from the feedback in that final session as well. So 3 parts to today. And then before we close today, I'll just share a couple of other things. I've got an offer for you today, which is just that basically if you'd like a free coaching session, I'm putting that out as a bit of an offer today. So I'll put that out to you at the end. And then we'll wrap up and we will be finished by about 5 to 10. So that'll give you 5 minutes before your 10 o'clock start. So you're not racing between this meeting and the next, which often happens to us, doesn't it? So we'll keep the time this morning. So thank you everybody for joining us. I've also just seen that Brian joined us as well. So Brian, thanks for joining us. Great to see you too. So hi Brian, good to see you. So let me just share my screen so that you can see what I can see. Hold on a sec. Let me share that screen and start presenting so that you can see something on that screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen now. Can everybody see my screen okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the thumbs up. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about mastering world-class leadership coaching. And there is a difference between generalized coaching and leadership coaching. I'll talk about that as we go through. But this morning is about, you remember if you've been to sessions like this before, this morning's about thinking time. It's about slowing down, getting off the treadmill, finally kind of getting some headspace and an opportunity to really just think a bit more clearly about what you're doing and give you some ideas that you can take into your businesses or into your teams or out to your customers. So thinking space this morning, and what we're going to talk about, we'll talk about why we use coaching. Why would you want to use coaching? We'll then talk about how do we start coaching and how do we introduce coaching. And then we'll look at a couple of frameworks. We'll look at our coach model that we use in Focus for Growth, and it's from the book Coaching Leaders, Unlock Your Leadership Superpower. So we'll look at the coach model, and we'll look at the gold standard in coaching conversations, which is the GROW model. So that's the idea for this morning. Good morning, Jason. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you. And then we'll use breakout rooms for discussion, and I'll just invite each breakout room to feedback when we return back for the final part of our session today, and then we'll wrap up and close. Okay, so that's today. Why use coaching? So the reason I believe coaching is so powerful is because if those of you who have been in leadership roles for a while, I'd be interested to hear when you first started in leadership roles, what your experience was, because mine was one where I was promoted from within a team, and I very quickly became quite isolated. And not only did I become quite isolated, but because I'd been one of the higher performers in that team, I guess I felt like I knew best. So I ended up in this situation where I not only felt a bit isolated, but I was probably overly directive in that team. And that left me in a situation where I was kind of spinning far too many plates. I created quite a bit of dependency in that team. And before I knew it, it was kind of unsustainable for me to keep leading the team. And I then was invited to go on a leadership development course, and I learned how to coach. And the transition for me, the transformation for me from being a directive manager who felt like I had to have all the answers to then learning how to coach and recognizing that actually collectively a team has much more capability than any individual, and being able to coach and facilitate that team really draws the best from them and helps you to start to create a bit of independence for yourself and for that team, start to share responsibility and actually create more time and freedom as a leader rather than as a manager. And it's almost counterintuitive, I've found, because as a high performer in a business, whatever your role is, the reason you get to a point where you're promoted generally is because you're really good at what you do. And then you create this almost trap for yourself where you feel like you almost have to have all the answers. So coaching is the antidote to it. And when you read books on leadership, there's lots of different books on leadership. One of the core skills that underpins great leadership is being able to coach. So it becomes then a style, a leadership style that can really help you expand beyond just coaching itself. So there's lots of good reasons to coach. My personal experience is that one. That's why I learned to coach out of necessity. But of course, it's also, I love this quote from Steve Jobs. It's also because it doesn't make sense in our businesses for us to hire great people, smart people, and then as leaders tell them what to do. The reason we hire those smart people, people that are, highly capable, is so that they can make suggestions and start to tell us how to improve and work out what to do that helps us to take the business to the next level. So it's really important that we find a way to engage those people and draw that skill and experience from them, because it won't happen any other way. And if we think about coaching as a model, so I'll talk today about the GROW model, and some of you may be familiar with that, but it's a good reminder for it. If you've seen any of this before, just try and kind of think about it from a fresh perspective today. This is our plan to coach model. And the reason that I developed this model is because coaching as an intervention is really effective, but it's a small slice of what we do. So what we'll do today is we'll look at the GROW model, and that sits under this coach for change piece of our model. But if you think about, as a leader, how you start to coach and inspire your teams, we have to go way beyond just individual coaching conversations. We have to build a plan that people can buy into. We have to start to think about a vision for our organization, and that's the first step of our model here, the plan. We have to make sure that we have a relationship of trust with people so that they will be able to share their ideas with confidence. And they'll trust us to have coaching conversations, create some space and silence, maybe a little bit of awkwardness every now and then. That's what coaching does. And that's important, that people feel confident in those conversations. We then start with contracting. So having a strategic conversation with somebody, agreeing standards, boundaries, values, performance expectations, and just making sure that we have an agreement in place. Once that contracting and agreement is in place, then we can start to think about specific objectives and goals, so how they'll deliver on that contract that we've agreed together. And once the objectives and goals are clear, then we have to create some time for them to take action on the plan, and for us to spend some time observing, being able to observe them doing what they do. And that's important because that observation allows us to praise them where they're doing really well, reinforce the good work, but also where we notice opportunities for development and improvement, to be able to then coach them for change. And that's what we'll talk about today. So the coaching for change is the piece that happens. But as you can see, we need the broader set of leadership skills to be able to effectively coach for change. And then the final step in our model is this, we call it the hero stage. So how do we help people to see a bigger picture for themselves? So they start to think about their career development, they start to think about skill development, they start to think about how they can contribute at a higher level in the business. And we do that through a development cycle and development process, and really start to get people thinking bigger about their contribution. And that's really a really effective model that we then can continue throughout, a monthly, quarterly, and annual cycle. So it's really effective as a coaching framework beyond just coaching conversations. But let's talk about the coach for change piece today. So we know that we can only coach people if we spend some time to question them, to listen to them, and to create some space for them to really think clearly and start to open up their mind to new possibilities, new ways of doing things. And if we do that in a way that's led by coaching, it's change that happens for that person from the inside out. So rather than us projecting ideas on them, they start to open up and have these ideas for themselves. And that's much more effective because they take responsibility and have ownership for those ideas. So we can only do that by questioning, listening, and creating space. And we will talk about the GROW model in a moment. It's widely regarded as the gold standard in coaching conversations. And the GROW model was originally introduced by Sir John Whitmore in his book, Coaching for Performance. And if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth a read. It's a great book. And what he talks about really is, first thing we have to do is park ourselves as a coaching leader or as a coach for somebody else and think about the other person only. So it becomes a conversation purely about them, not about sharing ideas, purely about getting them to become more aware of what they're doing today. Rapport, having a relationship and building trust is really important, because very often in coaching conversations, people have to share some vulnerabilities. They might have to acknowledge and recognize what's not working in order to change it. And if we don't have the trust in the person that's coaching or leading the coaching conversation, then we can find that actually people don't have that openness and receptiveness to the coaching conversation. So that relationship is really important. We need to slow down. We already said to create some space, and we really want the other person to start to think more expansively. How do they start to think differently from how they do today? And you might have heard me use this quote before. I heard it on a podcast late last year. But there's a lot of research that shows that in psychology that shows that most of us think the same thoughts 90% of the time. So we repeat and replay the same thoughts 90% of the time. So to get people to change and think differently does require a bit of an intervention. So you can see where coaching helps us and our teams to do that. And of course, we said it's about questioning, listening. It's also sometimes it's about challenging assumptions, challenging perceptions. And there's lots of ways to do that. And it's interesting, sometimes you will have experienced this as leaders. Your teams will be stuck in a way of thinking about something, and they'll say, well, you might say something like, well, that's how it is. And one of the questions I like to ask is, how do you know? How do you know that's how it is? Because sometimes people just haven't thought beyond just what they've been told or been conditioned to think. So sometimes we have to break that cycle. And of course, for us as leaders, it is also about trusting our intuition and previous experience, and that guides the coaching conversation. So let's talk about the GROW model, and then I'm going to invite you to talk to each other about what ideas you've got about implementing this. So it's coaching-led, question-led. So GROW is a mnemonic, and each letter of the word GROW is a stage in the coaching process. So the G is for goal. So and the way that the GROW model is designed, it's intentional. So very often when people come to you in the first instance, they'll be fixated or rooted in the problem they're facing. And the whole idea of the GROW model is that it immediately takes people out of the problem to the solution. So what do you want instead? If someone comes with a problem, as a coaching leader, our job is to go, okay, it's interesting, that's a problem. Tell me a bit about, they can kind of talk about the situation a bit, but then we say, okay, so what do we want instead, right? What's the goal that we're looking to achieve? And that changes the way they think about the problem. Then we can revisit the reality. Okay, so where are we now? And reality then kind of says, okay, so this is what we want. This is where we are. That makes the gap really evident. So then we create this gap between what we want and where we are today. And then the O is options. So we start to talk about what the options are to make changes and close that gap between what the person in front of us wants and where they are today. And that options discussion is really important because it can go in any direction. It really is led by us as a coach, but it really is driven by the person that we're coaching, because they'll have all the ideas and they'll know the experience and they'll have the knowledge. And then finally, we want to go from what they could do to what they will do. And that's the cycle. So I've got some examples of questions for each of those stages, but you will have your own, I'm sure. So what is the goal for the goals section? What is the ideal outcome? Maybe it's a performance discussion. You might ask someone, describe what high performance means to you. or what experience you've got of high performance. So we're really starting to get to people thinking about where they could be or what they want to achieve. The reality questions, where are you now? What have you tried so far? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What haven't you tried? So we start to get them thinking differently. So the reality question is really about understanding, up until this point, what's happened. And then the options questions are, at simplest, what are your options? What could you do differently? What would you do if success were guaranteed? What would a high performer do? So we start to ask questions that just get people thinking differently. And there's the if you had a magic wand, what would you do? If you won the lottery, how would that change the way you approach this? Or if there were unlimited budget, what would you do? So there's all sorts of questions you can ask that get people thinking differently. And then we bring them back to as the final stage. Okay, so there's all these options available to you. What will you do? And then when will you do it? So this is really about that commitment. What do you need to do to fully commit to this? Because very often we'll have conversations with people that have ideas. They'll talk about action, but don't always follow through. So this will stage is really important, because this is, where the rubber hits the road, is what action people actually take. And then I really like the final couple of questions. How will I know? So if you're coaching someone for accountability, for example, as a leader, how will I know you've done it? And that's really interesting, because then that's up to that person to then say, well, here's how I'm going to keep you updated, or here's how I think that's best communicated. And then finally, how will it feel when you succeed, when you actually achieve this? How are you going to feel about it? So you leave people on a high in terms of that final conversation around the grow model and the coaching conversation. So feel free, if you want to take a quick snapshot of that slide, feel free to do so. I will send you these slides after today's session anyway. But what we'll do now is I'll just give you an opportunity to have a discussion with people on the line. So if you can talk about your kind of, from this first 15-20 minute session, what are the insights that you've gained, and what action do you think you need to take personally and individually, and have a discussion about that in a couple of groups. Where are we to? Yeah, we'll do a couple of groups. And then if you can kind of just take a note, if one person in your group could just take a note of some of the key themes and actions that you talk about and discuss. And then when we regroup, I'm going to give you about 15 minutes for this conversation. When we regroup, I'll just invite someone from each of the two groups to share back what you've discussed and the action that you'll take. And that'll be useful for everybody to hear those key changes that you're looking to make. Okay, so let me come back. I hope you have enjoyed your conversations. So I'd love to hear your kind of key themes and key takeaways. We'll do it group by group. So group one was Brian, Dan, Fiona, and Leanne. Who would like to share back from your group?
We didn't actually decide who's going to do this.
I'm quite happy to far away.
I know that Brian's definitely taken, but I think anyone would be happy to do it. But I know, Brian, you definitely
I've scribbled some notes.
Yeah, go for it, Brian.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, to the group, please chime in if I've missed anything. But just to feedback, so a couple of things. Reference to 90% thinking just then.
Yeah.
And I think that it was Dan that made the point that, if you keep thinking and the same, then you're probably going to get the same results. So unless you stop and kind of think differently, then you're probably not going to struggle to change what you're doing and what you're delivering. There was some comments around creating space. Sometimes we just need to probably stop, and that's probably linked to that 90% thinking. So time to create space. Review your goals, revisit your vision, your plans, and actually see where you are on track against that. There was a comment around grounding related to that as well. So just really regrounding ourselves related to the vision and the model and the plans that we've got. I think as well, we kind of said that generally, if you're being successful, don't beat yourself up too much, because you're obviously doing some things right. but it's kind of just, you know, taking that time out to refocus to make sure you're on direction.
Yeah.
And then Leanne said one of the things that they've done recently, and I think Dan also echoed this as well, is basically sometimes it's good to go back to basics with the team, do kind of a knowledge check on training, check on the support, you know, to make sure that everything you're doing is right for the customer. And actually, I think for both Leanne and Dan that they've done that, and actually that kind of highlighted some gaps in the team's knowledge. So, which was interesting.
Yeah. Foundations are really important to revisit, aren't they? Because if they're not in place, if you make the assumption they are in place and they're not, then performance starts to slip off track, and you can find out too late that they're not, that people aren't just doing the stuff that is fundamental to delivering their role. Yeah, it's really good. I like that. Thanks, Brian. Any other comments from the group? Anything that anybody would like to add?
No, I think Brian's done a brilliant job of summing up our discussions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Very succinct as well, Brian. Very good. Thank you. Excellent. I'm glad that was useful for you as well, and sharing the experiences that you've had recently, Dan and Leanne, about kind of going back to the fundamentals and what that surfaces for you is really useful. Good. Thank you. Room 2 was Christina, Jason, Les, and Nadeem.
Yes. I did take a few notes, but let's jump in as well.
Thanks.
Thanks,
I think because everybody has got different experiences and on different journeys, we kind of looked at from a customer's point of view, helping them on their journey, also getting people to kind of use their time more efficiently, get them to think of what the challenges are, what the issues are, and hopefully getting them to find the right solutions, understanding kind of their pain points, and try taking the customer through a process so that they're thinking for themselves, encourage them. It's quite easy to put a solution down for somebody and somebody to follow it, but then they're following what you're actually doing. It's making them think, and that's where I guess you start identifying some of the gaps and possibly going back to basics as the previous group kind of looked at. And if you start encouraging that, that's when it opens up probably further either opportunities or challenges as well in terms of where you would like your team to be. And then there's the fine line between whether you're coaching or mentoring, because somebody did mention that they were a mentor to the team, but then it's been beginning to change to coaching them. And how do they kind of jump from mentoring to coaching? And I think hence the reason why they're also here as well. To ensure getting the best out of your team and develop them, ask them the question in terms of where are they wanting to be. And if they know where they're wanting to be, that's when you can probably identify some of the gaps which you can both work on, as opposed to kind of micromanaging them. Somebody also mentioned air gap as well, which was around discipline, accountability, keeping an eye on things. I mean, Les, if you want to mention anything more, what I may have missed. Or have I captured everything?
It's a step back. Sometimes the air gap's a step back and just thinking, hang on a minute, I'm telling them what to do, not asking them what they should be doing, or getting them to think about the answer, really. Because if they think about, if they come up with the answer, there's more likelihood they'll do it. And, you know, the 90% thing, if we can get them, move them down 80%, 70%, it just takes time for them to think about, because they're not always forthcoming with everything. Just to come back, Stan, it's basically, was it Einstein said that if you do the same things over and over again and looking for different outcomes, that's
Yeah.
stupidity.
Insanity, I think he called it. He said
Insanity,
the
that's it. Yeah.
definition of insanity. That's right, Les. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So, if you're doing that all the time, yeah, you're going to go insane because you'll just get the same results.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's really good feedback. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Les. That's great. There's in psychology, or actually it's neuroscience. There's this principle around how the brain functions and how neural pathways are formed. So basically, two neurons. Whenever we change our minds or we do something different or we take a new action, the brain creates what we call a neural pathway. But it only happens if we make a decision or we have that light bulb moment ourselves. And what it explains is that if we spend too much time telling people what to do and they're just following instructions, rather than, as you said, Les, asking them and getting them to come up with the idea and say, this is what I'm going to do, and then do it, then the difference is in whether or not they start to make those synaptic connections in the brain. And that's why very often you might find if your team are coming back to you asking the same questions over and over, or you get this repetitive kind of theme around support that they need, you think, why haven't they figured this out? We've had this conversation before. It very often is because we just keep feeding them again. We keep telling them to what to do again and again and again, and they never actually make that leap to, right, I need to be deciding this for myself. And the next time this comes up, I need to think about it differently so that I can make the decision and take responsibility for change that's mine, not, Justin's as my manager who keeps telling me what to do again and again. And it's really important that we recognize this isn't just about coaching and building, responsibilities. It's actually about helping people to become more capable. And that's the key. And it's on us, incumbent on us as managers and leaders to be able to do that. Yeah, great conversations this morning, everybody. Thank you. Any final feedback from the groups about the discussion this morning? Anything that hasn't been covered that you think is useful just to reflect on?
I think the theme seems quite consistent here, Justin. So I think one of the points I was making, and it's quite recent, was all companies, bar none that I can think of, lay out their strategy in January and then don't look at that slide until the following January meeting. I think that was kind of underpinning some of what we were discussing, and seems similar to what Nadeem and Les have been chatting about, really.
Yeah. You roll it out once a year and expect people to follow it.
Yeah.
I think this was quite typical, Les, because Les has worked in the pharmaceutical industry as well, where you would get plans, etc., around January, February at a conference with all the big bands, etc. Come September, a complete change of plan.
Yeah.
And they would realize, obviously, targets are not going to be met and so on and so forth.
And the take back of money as well.
And what happens if you haven't spent your budget? It's taken back, and all of a sudden a 3-month consultation comes in because, somebody even on say 50,000-60,000 pounds a year, the package is actually 120, 130 if you start adding in holidays, car, etc. So what you do, you get rid of 10 people. That's £1 million saving. That's what happens. They kind of make the targets, or they're not that far off by Christmas time. Then they go back into a new recruitment drive, which, to recruit people, it's not straightforward. The amount of money and investment, and then the knowledge that you've actually lost, and now you're bringing in somebody new. And it's all about relationship building if you're selling in a particular area. And so it's this vicious circle that it just repeats itself year on year.
Yeah.
And I still see it today. It's happening. Big companies recruit, then let go, then it starts again. And
not 90% of the same thoughts going over and over again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definition of insanity, as they say.
It's just a replay. I've got a great idea. Why don't we start the strategy again? and let's talk again in January.
Well, Justin,
Yeah.
I think you on one of your sales calls that we've done in the past, I think, is it 18 contacts with the customer, something like that, to generate a successful outcome.
Yeah.
And I guess the strategy is a similar process, isn't it, for your team? It's going to take repetition,
Yeah.
revisit, reflection.
I
Yeah.
think in the
Continual reinforcement.
in the pharmaceutical industry, they used to say 5 visits would
Yeah,
create
5 or
a
6, yeah.
prescription. 5 or
Yeah.
6 would.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
that,
if-
yeah, you're right, Nadeem. But the latest evidence is showing that it takes up to 18 touch points. May not be visits. You might have, literature drops. You might have, telesales calls. They might see an advert in a journal. And when you add all of those touch points together, it's now saying I think it's between 18 and 20 for the average customer to then engage.
So if
you
you're
can see why it's-
recruiting constantly,
Yeah.
and letting go, it's a challenge to reach that 18 points then, those touch
Yeah.
points.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Justin.
Great conversation. Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add one other comment one other point we covered was, in terms of the grow model and coaching, we were talking about the fact that the longer you've been in a role or leading a team, you can perhaps drift away from that structure.
Yes.
And actually moving to a new role or a new company actually refreshes that almost. It kind of forces you back into that structure. So, I guess for anybody who's been in a role for a long time or in a company for a long time, sometimes just try and maybe revisit that a little bit,
Yeah. It's almost like,
I
as
think
you
it's
said,
constant revisiting.
Yeah.
In a sort of, not bit by bit, not full revisit. So if you're doing sort of monthly updates and things like that, you can basically add in, some coaching, have you thought about this? What if when did this work before? Why isn't it not working? What you're not doing that you did differently, that type of thing. So in the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of that going around. Yeah, because they always want more and more and more and more and more. Even if you got massive sales last time, they want you to add 20% on that.
Yeah.
Not just pharmaceuticals, Les.
That is the nature.
But
That's the nature of business,
I'm not,
right?
Yeah.
It's
I've
everywhere,
worked
Les. It's
outside the
everywhere.
pharmaceutical
Every
industry for years as well now. So, I'm doing an AI company. I've got an AI company, so we're basically helping businesses adopt AI. And what we're finding with that, it's basically with this, we have to coach them, we have to develop them, because there's a lot of companies now thinking, I'll wait and see, because it's all going to change and it's all going to get cheaper. Well, it's not, because there's going to be more and more and more and more, and it gets more and more expensive. So they've got to integrate it now to get the benefit of it coming along in the future as well. So it's trying to get them past the mindset that it's going to cost me a fortune. So you're looking at your value. So if you put your value-based propositions into the coaching side as well, that you can move them on. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's yours.
Thank you, Les. There's a real thing here, we talk about our teams going back to fundamentals. Sometimes it's also us going back to fundamentals, isn't it?
Yes.
Revisiting those things that we know work, that sometimes we drift away from, because, I think it's human nature for all of us. It's that drift back to, put old habits and behaviors when actually we know what we should be doing. We don't often do it. And that's why it's important for conversations like this. So thank you all so
your
much.
Comfortable bit. You go back
what's
to your
comfortable
comfortable zones.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep stretching those to make yourself better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Ladies and gents, thanks so much for joining me this morning. I will wrap up because I promised to be done by 5:02. I'm just going to put into the chat, I won't share my screen. I'm just going to put into the chat a link to my calendar. If anybody is interested in just like a short one-to-one, like 45-minute opportunity just to talk about your specific business, your situation, anything that's happening for you that would be useful to get some coaching on, Coaching is kind of my specialty. I was going to say superpower then. It probably
Well,
is,
why
actually.
not?
Probably is, but yeah, it's certainly my specialty. If anybody is interested, I've just put a link in the chat for the group, so that will take you directly into my calendar. You'll see my availability, and then you can just book a 45-minute one-to-one with me, where we'll talk basically through, whatever it is that's important for you. So normally there's a kind of, where are you now? What are you trying to achieve? So I'll use the GROW model. Believe it or not, you'll now be more conscious of that. And then what options have you got? And then what actions do you need to take? And it's sometimes it's useful just to have an extra pair of eyes on your current situation and the goals that you have for the future. So feel free to do that. If anybody is interested in any of the programs that we run, reach out to me directly and I'll happily share details. We run these sessions. I do these as a weekly drop-in, like today. Most weeks. Next week we're back on Friday at 9 a.m. Week after that I'm on holiday, so I don't think I'll be doing the one after that, but then I'll be back the week after that. So if anybody's around, I'll send you details. Les has just dropped his LinkedIn profile into the chat as well, so feel free to connect with Les. If anybody would like to do the same, feel free to do that before we wrap up. But thanks all so much for joining me this morning. As I said on previous sessions, these only work if you show up, otherwise it's literally me talking to myself. So thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it this morning and got some value from today's session. Just a quick show of hands. Everyone, if you got some value from today's session, everyone got something they can take away and use? Yeah?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Great.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank
Justin.
you. Thank you so much. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And hopefully I'll see you next week.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank
Take care, everyone.
you. Have a good
Thank you.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Pleasure. See you. Bye.